Have you ever sat in the middle of a crisis, a health battle, a marriage falling apart, or a child struggling, and felt like your prayers were simply vanishing into thin air? It's hard enough to face the trial, but it's even harder when you see somebody else getting a simple miracle while your mountain-sized problem remains unmoved. You're asking, why does God answer some prayers and not others? Because you feel forgotten. You're comparing yourself unjustly, and spiritually, well, you're pretty exhausted. Don't give up hope, my friend. By the end of today's episode, you will understand the Tapestry Principle, how God uses the threads of our greatest struggles to weave a strength we didn't know we possessed. We're also going to help you solve the pain of unanswered pleas by exploring the rest of the story of Joseph of Egypt and why God sometimes keeps us in the discomfort to create something better in us. We're moving from why me to answering the why. Stay tuned. Ordinary women, extraordinary faith. When God calls, we say yes. The Arise Women of God podcast. Hello and welcome to another episode of the Arise Women of God podcast. I'm your host, Tamara K. Anderson. And joining me today is my amazing co-founder of Women Warriors of Light, the wonderful Wendy Christensen, who happens to be a great resource because she's a licensed clinical social worker and has so much depth to draw upon. And today, Wendy and I are having a very real and raw conversation about the prayers we don't get the yes that we are looking for. First, I'm going to share my struggle when my sons were diagnosed with autism and the perspective shift that changed everything. Second, Wendy is going to take us into the pit with Joseph of Egypt to show how a no today is often a massive preparation for tomorrow or next year or 10 years from now. Third, we're going to discuss why some answers take a long period of preparation and how to find the strength while you are stuck in the waiting room. And finally, we will talk about what God is creating in you while you are waiting for the miracle. But let's kick it off by talking about the thread and the tapestry. For example, when I was asking God to heal my sons from autism, I knew he had the power. And, seeing people with their little miracles here and there. And yes, was I asking for a big miracle? I sure was. But one of the things I've learned more in hindsight than in going through it was that God was in it for my long-term growth and happiness. And I was asking him to take away the thing that would teach me the very most. And I was comparing myself to other people, which is so unfair. Comparison is the thief of joy. And it really is. And so God's answer to me when I poured out my heart one night, was asking God, why can't I have a normal family? He said, Tamara, this is normal for you. And did it take the challenge away? No. But it did give me a different perspective. Quit comparing yourself to everybody else. This is you. This is your family. These are your gifts. He could see, I like the comparison of the eternal. God sees the whole tapestry. He sees that finished product, right? And I'm staring at a single thread saying, this thread is going to ruin my life. It's not the life I want for myself, but God could see the vision of who I could become with this challenge, right? Sometimes, I don't know about you guys, but I feel like I'm staring at the knots on the back of the rug, thinking the pattern is completely ruined. But Wendy is now going to dive into one of those prophets in the Old Testament who spent decades, sitting in the messy part of his story before he could step back and see the masterpiece.
Anyways, so Joseph gets sold and he gets sold into Egypt. But I think in that pit where his brothers are kind of outside the pit, partying and eating and rejoicing and, hey, we got this great plan, how rejected he must have felt But in the scriptures, it says, and God was with him, which also tells me he must have been with God. He must have thought, okay, I just don't know the rest of the story, but I'm going to trust God. And he does just that. And he does get sold to some merchants, and his brothers don't know whatever happened to him. Well, then he gets sold into Egypt to Potiphar. And Potiphar is kind of a big wig in his world. And Joseph works hard. He has to put in the hard work. He doesn't just sit back and let, things be taken. And I'm sure he questioned, hey, God, where are you? I'm sold into this place and I'm a slave. Why are you not here in my story? And then Potiphar's wife goes after Joseph and he resists because God's in his heart. And then she accuses him of awful things that he didn't do. And he's thrown in jail. And he's there like 3 years in jail. 3 years is a long time to be in prison. And I would have thought, where's God? But again, it says, and God was with him. And what I have seen is he just doesn't know the rest of the story. He doesn't see that God is preparing him for great things, because the rest of the story is he interprets dreams for these two, the baker, the butler in the prison. 3 years later, the butler remembers when the Pharaoh's asking, can someone interpret dreams? Oh yeah, there's this Hebrew slave in prison that he can interpret dreams. And so Joseph interprets the Pharaoh's dream and warns him of the famine that was coming, and helps prepare Egypt so that Joseph is prepared and ready when his brothers eventually do come back and are begging for food because they don't have food. That whole entire time, if Joseph had just been like, God hates me, he's not listening to me, he doesn't pay attention to me in the pit, in the prison, now with Pharaoh, but Pharaoh sees his worth and his value and promotes him, and he's high up. Joseph didn't know the rest of the story, but God did. And sometimes it's hard for me to know there's a rest of the story. Like you were saying, that tapestry, I see one thread, but God sees the entire tapestry. And the hardest part is trusting that he sees the whole picture, that he sees the whole tapestry, and that he's not a God of chaos, but a God of order, and that he sent Christ to help us in the weaving of the tapestry where we can't see the picture, to trust that the picture will come together.
Joseph did not know he was in a preparation phase while he was in that prison cell. He just knew it was hard. And often we make that same mistake. That preparation is an absence of God. But as religious leader Richard G. Scott taught, it is a mistake to think that every prayer we utter will be answered immediately. Some prayers require a long period of preparation on our part. Romans chapter 8, verse 28, and we know that all things work together for good to them that love God, to them who are called according to his purpose. I love this verse, and I have clung to it at so many times in my life when it felt like life was falling apart, that my prayers were not being answered. And I think the key in this verse is keeping hope that things will work out for our good. And sometimes I think maybe for our good might not even happen until the next life. So trusting God that whether things get tied up in a nice little bow by the end of this life, or maybe it's the next, that everything will work out for our good.
I was thinking about how you started being a mom of autistic boys and wanting, the autism taken away. God wasn't creating a mom that had a miracle performed in her life with boys having autism removed, but he was creating a mom who could handle the challenges of autistic boys and became a compassionate, loving, caring, even more tolerable mom who could handle so much more with these beautiful boys with autism. He helped you to arrive to a higher, greater, better state as a mother in what you could handle and endure and put up with, right? Than if it had been a mom who received a miracle and healed them.
Mm.
Look at what he was creating in you. And I think sometimes we don't see, we look for the end of the story or the prayer answered quickly as a relief to get out of the discomfort. But God sometimes keeps us in the discomfort and the hard and the difficult because of what he's creating in us.
So, my friend, God is not ignoring your prayer. He is answering the version of you he is still creating. Whether you're in the pit, in the prison, or in a waiting room, trust that the master weaver has not dropped a single thread of your life. He knows the end from the beginning, and he can see who you are becoming through this messy middle process. And if you're still struggling to feel his hand in the messy middle, we have built a tool to help you find the light. You can download our Roadmap to Revelation PDF and a bonus Receiving Light and Revelation audio MP3 meditation for free at the link below. Inside that roadmap, we walk you through step 3, the growth process, which God uses to teach us line upon line, little by little, while we endure and wait for the big answer. So, my friends, don't give up on the big tapestry just because you're stuck on a knot. He sees you and will answer your prayer with your eternal perspective in mind. And someday you'll look back in your life and say, "Oh, I see it now." So, until next time, my friend, may you yoke yourself to God, trust the process, arise, and do it God's way, God strong.